For those who don't know, I spent about 3 months roughly creating a research paper on this idea, and I can quickly give you an idea of what we're going into. German foreign policy sucked. Here's why. Externalization is an absolutely fascinating component of geopolitics, and I'd be willing to bet you haven't heard about it. It exists primarily as a psychological phenomenon, where one blames others for his or her own self-inflicted actions. There's a really great video by John Fredrickson called Externalization, which really quickly delves into this concept at a therapeutic level. Still, essentially all you need to know is when someone blames others for the things that they do, that's externalization. This is also extremely common in the geopolitical realm. Countries will often act in manners totally bizarre to those around her, but after proper analysis of her own internal strifes and issues, one may be able to better understand exactly why a country operates in the way that it does, especially in regards to foreign policy. Case in point number one, whatever the Russian Federation has been doing since 2014 in Ukraine, if there isn't really a better example of why the fuck are you guys doing this than that, then truthfully, I don't really know what there is. Winter War Round 2, let's fucking go! Yeah, it's all a little bit of a shit show, isn't it? The thing to remember about externalization is that it doesn't necessarily equal justification. Rather, it just helps us understand the train of thought, not the morality of the action. Morality is an often subjective thing, especially in the realm of geopolitics, where there is no good or bad, only gray. So comparing externalization to justification is not exactly fair here. As a case study for externalization, I'm going to be discussing the German Empire leading up to World War I and some of the foreign policy under Kaiser Wilhelm II. The German path to unification is quite possibly the best example we have of externalization. The infamous Sonderweg, the process by which German society developed against the grain of normal Western European developments, which directly led to World War I and World War II, proves this in many ways. The process leading to German unification, that being the years 1815 to 1871, are a time of incredible change, violently shifting the map of Germany from the post-Napoleonic map of kingdoms and duchies to the mighty German Empire under the Prussian banner. What was significant about this period, though, was that unification did not come from the bottom up. Middle-class citizens did attempt to unify through diplomacy with the Frankfurt Parliament of 1848, but this failed and would only really give way to Otto von Bismarck and his unification through arms. Upon Bismarck becoming Chancellor in the early 1860s, Bismarck would engage Prussia in 3 different wars, uniting the Central German states by 1871. These 3 wars, we shorthand them as the Prussian War for Unification, would really do a lot to change the precedent of the way Germany acted as a country in regards to its foreign policy. This process of uniting through war sounds good. It sounds like a cunning statesman who managed to do what no other German had to this point been able to do. But in reality, all this did was set a precedent, and a very dangerous precedent. Now, the Central German government had produced a cult of personality surrounding the idea of war. Germany had shifted itself from a society of writers and thinkers to one of fighters. Now, young men in Germany were inspired by Moltke, not Goethe. So then, when Bismarck was dismissed in 1890 and replaced with an irrational, militaristic Kaiser, it was only a matter of time before Germany stepped out of bounds. Germany was plagued by instability within itself during the process of unification. These internal schisms were so great that the only way to unify was through the Prussian Wars of Unification under Bismarck. In order to solve the German question of unifying her internal schisms, that of the liberals, Christians, socialists, and conservatives, Bismarck just gave them all an enemy to rally against, someone to use to appeal to their one commonality, German nationalism. The problem now was that the only thread holding this new union together was exactly that, nationalism. It didn't make for a good template to make foreign policy that wouldn't piss off the world. The Germany of the 1890s was a melting pot of social issues. The Kulturkampf of the 1870s between Bismarck's new state and the old rule of the Catholic Church led to extreme alienation of Catholic citizens in the Reich. For context, Catholics made roughly 36% of the German population in 1871, especially in the Catholic-dominated southern states of Bavaria, Württemberg, and etc. All Catholic clergymen and bishops essentially had to fight against the German Empire now, alienating a huge portion of the German populace. One of the Kulturkampf laws literally permitted banishment as a fucking form of punishment. For context, by the way. To Bismarck, Germany was a nation dominated by the ideology of conservatism. Bismarck didn't really expect other parties such as the Catholics and the Socialists to come to any form of prominent representation within the government that he set up. Hence the reason that although it was lightly inspired by the British parliamentary system, it really wasn't intended to be a parliamentary system. What this meant was that as the Social Democrats rose to popularity, the conservative element of German society, most notably the monarchy and the ruling elites, increasingly would rage another culture kampf on the Social Democrat. Among that German elite, the SPD, the party name for the Social Democrats, was considered the, quote, enemy of the Reich, and therefore were suppressed in many of the same ways as the Catholics, and therefore, the Social Democrats also came to view the German government with severe distrust and fear. So then, Germany was in social turmoil between the Social Democrats, the ruling elite, and the Catholics. So let me ask you, what would you do if you were the king of this land? Would you increase democratic reform to allow citizens a fairer share? No, you'd be an asshole to the world. This is effectively the doctrine of externalization. In order to solve her own domestic issues, Bismarck had cunningly used geopolitics and war to his advantage to make German citizens, quote, set aside their differences. By the time Kaiser Wilhelm effectively took over in 1890, Germany had far more social issues and far less talented of a ruler attempting to continue the standard of German foreign policy. Therefore, when Kaiser Wilhelm II implemented his new aggressive foreign policy, called Weltpolitik, it failed. Horribly. This is probably the point of the video when you would expect me to give you a long list of things that Kaiser Wilhelm II did as something of a defense as to the reason I say that his foreign policy sucked, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Here it is. Why was he a king? He had bipolar disorder. We know this now! As a result of these scandals, and Germany's effort to proclaim the top step of the European equilibrium, she pushed away almost every great nation from her. She pushed away Russia by refusing negotiations on imports and exports, then aligned herself with Austria, which was the exact thing that Germany should do to push Russia away. She pushed herself away from Britain by challenging her on the seas. She then brought France and Russia closer together by acting erratically and in such a manner that neither of them knew what the fuck to expect. And then, Germany pushed Britain closer to the Franco-Russian alliance by acting so brashly that the historically neutral nation of Britain decided to align herself in peacetime towards France and Russia, two of Britain's greatest enemies only 20 years prior. Effectively, what happened was as German foreign policy externalized her clearly known issues by directly challenging the hegemony of other nations, she found herself more isolated. As she became more isolated, she was more and more fearful of her ever-failing geopolitical position. And frankly, it did not have to end this way. Far from it. Realistically, German relations with France and Russia were going to sour. That was simply the way of the European order at the time. There wasn't much that could be done there. But the souring of the Anglo-German alliance was entirely a German affair. British opinion of Germany was quite positive before Kaiser Wilhelm II came to power, and the Kaiser absolutely could have used his influence to garner a close relationship with Britain. And yet, largely due to externalization, Germany didn't do this. Logically speaking, Germany should have lowered the temperature on her foreign policy, aligned herself closer to Britain, and acted through diplomacy to navigate her economic policy. This analysis is a little disingenuous towards the German view of the Navy, however. German society at large, although especially the agrarians and the middle class, was obsessed with a large navy to protect her own interests, build colonies, and project the greatness of Germany. Memoirs of the time, most notably Alfred Turpin's, are convinced that Britain was the aggressor by not allowing the German Reich to pursue her naval plans. Quote, "No English statesman, if he was honest, has ever had any doubt as to the peaceful tendency of our policy at bottom and the purely defensive intentions of our fleet." Remember earlier when I mentioned that from a psychological view, externalization is when someone blames others for their own actions? Yeah, this is that. This is why it can be so scary when nations undergo social turmoil. An often logical course is to find an external enemy to rally around from the point of view of a statesman. For example, think of North Korea. Their whole system is propagated onto a hatred of the Americans and South Koreans. Without that enemy, the whole system would have collapsed years ago. So what did we learn today? Don't externalize your problems. You might banish the Catholics.